Storing chicken without a refrigerator might sound like something straight out of a survival reality show, but for the Amish, it's just part of daily life. With generations of passed-down knowledge and practical techniques, they've perfected the art of keeping poultry fresh in ways that would surprise most of us. In a world dominated by modern convenience, the Amish's approach to food preservation is both resourceful and innovative, truly inspiring when you stop to think about it. Now, have you ever thought about burying your meal underground? Sounds a bit bizarre, right? But for the Amish, it's not only sensible, it works beautifully. Imagine this. No buzzing fridge, no worrying about freezer burn, just dirt, and a bit of clever thinking. Long before the electric fridge was invented, the ground itself was the world's first cooler. And for the Amish, it's like having a hidden pantry that stays perfectly chilled all year round. No bills, no maintenance, just nature at its finest. Storing food underground is like putting it to sleep. There's something oddly satisfying about knowing that a meal stashed beneath your feet weeks ago is still fresh, waiting for you to dig it up. The beauty of this method lies in how stable the temperature stays deep under the earth, much like how caves maintain a cool climate no matter how hot it gets outside. Bacteria and mold can't thrive in the consistent coolness of the earth, and this natural refrigerator slows down spoilage, keeping food fresh for much longer. And get this, people have been using underground food storage for centuries. In fact, archaeologists have uncovered pits used to preserve meat dating back over 12,000 years. It's a time-honored tradition that proves the earth was always the best storage solution long before refrigeration. Of course, not just any hole will do. The Amish dig carefully planned root cellars, underground rooms made of wood or stone. These rooms are cool, dark, and dry, making them the perfect environment to prevent spoilage. The real genius of this method comes in how the chicken is packed. The Amish wrap it tightly in cloth, sometimes with a layer of wax paper, creating a barrier that keeps dirt out but still lets the meat breathe. I tried it once after hearing a friend rave about the method, and digging a hole to stash a roast was oddly satisfying. The real challenge came later, though, remembering exactly where I put it. One time, I forgot about it for a whole week longer than I meant to, and I was convinced I'd be digging up a science experiment. But to my surprise, the meat was just as fresh as the day I buried it. It's incredible how much less stress you feel when you don't have to monitor a fridge, hoping your leftovers survive another 24 hours. The taste, too, is richer, more flavorful, almost like the earth added a little seasoning of its own. Interestingly, early American settlers used underground storage to get through harsh winters when fresh food was harder to come by. While we depend on electricity to store food today, these old methods remind us that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best, and they often work better than the modern alternatives. There's a certain satisfaction in knowing that you can outsmart time without relying on technology. It's almost like telling the 21st century to take a back seat for a minute. And honestly, there's something uniquely rewarding about digging in the dirt to preserve your food instead of scrolling through apps. In the Amish way of life, food preservation isn't just about sustainability. It's about connecting with a tradition that spans centuries, proving that the simplest methods often provide the best results. So the next time you think about refrigeration, just remember, sometimes the earth is the best storage system there is. It brings back memories of BBQs, lazy summer afternoons, and that one uncle who always insists on showing off his grilling skills at every family gathering. But for the Amish, smoking chicken isn't just about the flavor. It's a time-tested way to make sure that meat stays good for months without refrigeration. This method goes way beyond modern-day BBQs. It's an age-old tradition that Native Americans and early settlers relied on to survive harsh winters when fresh meat wasn't exactly around the corner. And today, the Amish continue to carry that tradition forward, turning every chicken they smoke into both a piece of culinary art and a survival tool. The science behind smoking chicken is surprisingly clever. When wood burns, it releases chemicals that not only give the meat that signature smoky flavor, but also act as natural preservatives. Think of it as seasoning your food while giving bacteria the boot. Plus, the slow drying process that occurs during smoking reduces the moisture content in the meat. And with less moisture, there are fewer places for bacteria to thrive. It's a win-win. Delicious food that stays safe and edible for much longer. I've always found it funny how the same process that's used to create gourmet barbecue is also one of the oldest methods of preserving food. When I first tried smoking meat myself, I felt like part chef, part scientist, and part caveman all at once. But the tricky part? Keeping the fire just right, not too hot, not too cold. It's like babysitting a toddler who's constantly trying to set everything on fire. And of course, there's always the fun debate over which type of wood to use. The Amish tend to stick with hardwoods like hickory or oak, which add a rich, robust flavor. Some families, though, have their own secret wood blends that they swear by. One Amish farmer even joked, "We'd tell you what wood we use, but then we'd have to smoke you too." It's no surprise that smoked chicken doesn't just survive for months. It actually tastes better the longer it rests. There's something magical about that waiting period. It's like how chili always tastes better the next day. Once the chicken is smoked and stored properly, it doesn't need anything else. It's ready to go whenever you are. Whether you want to chop it up for soups, slice it for sandwiches, or just snack on it straight, the flavor is always a pleasant surprise. Even if you're not into camping or survival scenarios, having some smoked chicken tucked away feels empowering, almost like you've outsmarted modern life at its own game. It's a little piece of self-sufficiency in a world that seems to thrive on convenience. Now, when most people think about canning, they picture jars filled with jams or pickles, not exactly something that screams dinner. But the Amish? They've mastered the art of packing just about anything into jars, including chicken. It might sound like something out of a sci-fi lab, airtight seals, sterilization, bacteria annihilation, but it's all pretty straightforward when you see it in action. Take fresh chicken, pop it into a jar, and use a pressure canner to seal it so tightly that not even the tiniest microbe stands a chance. What you're left with is shelf-stable chicken that can sit safely in your pantry for years, just waiting to be used whenever you need it. The first time I heard someone say they had chicken in a jar, I honestly thought they were messing with me. But nope, it's the real deal. And the best part? It's surprisingly tasty. When you crack open a jar months or even years after sealing it, the chicken inside is just as good as the day it went in. My favorite part about this method is the reactions it gets. Casually dropping, "Oh yeah, I canned some chicken the other day," into a conversation will get you all kinds of curious looks. It's one of those things that sounds weird until you try it, and then it becomes one of those life hacks you can't believe you ever lived without. The process itself is actually pretty fascinating. Once the jars are sealed under high pressure, the chicken is basically in suspended animation, like some kind of time traveler just waiting for its moment to shine. The Amish love how practical this method is. There's no need to worry about power outages, spoiled meat, or fancy appliances. If the world decided to end tomorrow, those jars would still be there, filled with chicken and ready for whatever apocalyptic cooking you need to do. But here's the thing, canning chicken isn't just for emergencies. It makes regular life so much easier too. If you've ever had one of those days when cooking feels like climbing a mountain, knowing that there's already cooked chicken sitting in a jar is like winning the food lottery. You just pull it out, heat it up, and bam, dinner's ready. No defrosting, no stress, and definitely no sad microwave meals. When it comes to food preservation, canning is pure genius. It's not just about locking in freshness. It's about locking in peace of mind. You know that feeling when you find some questionable Tupperware in the fridge and have to guess how long it's been sitting there? Yeah, you don't get that with jars. They're like little time capsules, neatly labeled and ready whenever you need them. And the best part? Canned chicken can last about 3 to 5 years if done right. Imagine that, a meal just waiting for you years down the road, as if to say, "Don't worry, I've got your back." Now here's where things get a little weird, in the best way possible: fermenting chicken. Yeah, you read that right. Fermenting chicken is one of those ideas that makes you raise an eyebrow at first. But once you get it, it's like, of course that works. The Amish didn't just stumble upon this method. They knew that when the right kind of bacteria take over, they push the bad bacteria aside. Think of it as giving your chicken an all-natural security system. What might sound like a science experiment gone wrong is actually an ancient method that turns spoilage into something safe and tasty. The process is simple. Instead of fearing bacteria, the Amish invite the good ones to throw a controlled party, and these helpful microbes multiply, transforming the meat with unique flavors while preserving it. This might remind you of kimchi or sauerkraut, but don't get too excited. Fermented chicken doesn't taste like either of those. It's in a flavor category all its own, and to some, it's definitely an acquired taste. Honestly, explaining fermented chicken to someone who's never heard of it is kind of like telling them you made chicken yogurt. People get that same confused look, half curious, half horrified. It's one of those things you almost have to try for yourself to understand. But once you do, it clicks. It's all about trusting the process. The good bacteria win every time, leaving behind a unique flavor that might just surprise you. This type of fermentation isn't just some niche foodie trend either. Cultures all over the world have been doing it for centuries. In Northern Europe, fermented fish has been a staple for ages, and in the Arctic, indigenous people have fermented meat and fat to survive brutal winters. The Amish know they're in good company with this method. It's not about chasing exotic flavors. It's about survival, and sometimes survival just happens to taste pretty darn good. Some things never go out of style, and rubbing meat with salt is one of those timeless tricks. This method feels almost ancient because it is. Sailors, traders, and armies have relied on salt to keep their food from turning into a science project for centuries. The Amish? They just carry on the tradition, treating salt like the VIP guest in their chicken preservation toolkit. When you cover meat with salt, the magic happens as it pulls out moisture. Less moisture means fewer places for bacteria to sneak in and cause trouble. It's like giving your chicken an invisible force field, only this one actually tastes pretty good. There's something oddly satisfying about the process. You take a piece of chicken, rub it generously with salt, and then you wait. It feels like an exercise in patience, but the result? A tough, flavorful piece of meat that can last far longer than anything left out of the fridge. When it's time to use it, a quick soak or rinse revives the chicken, making it surprisingly tender and ready to cook. It's almost poetic. What starts off fresh and juicy gets dried and preserved only to be reborn as something delicious once again. If you think about it, the concept isn't too far from mummification, except in the end, you're not just admiring it, you're frying it up for dinner. Salt-cured meat was so reliable that ships in the 1800s wouldn't dare set sail without it. Long voyages across unpredictable oceans meant fresh food was out of the question, and the only thing standing between sailors and starvation was salted meat. It's hard to argue with a preservation technique that once kept people alive through storms and battles, and still finds a place in Amish kitchens today. Every now and then, even the most traditional Amish households dabble in slightly modern tools like pressure cookers. Sure, they might shy away from electricity, but when it comes to making sure chicken stays edible for months or even years, practicality wins out. A pressure cooker isn't just some fancy pot. It's like a preservation superhero in disguise. Using heat and high pressure, it wipes out bacteria and locks in flavor. The result? A piece of chicken that feels like it's been frozen in time, but tastes like it was cooked yesterday. What's fascinating is how the Amish manage to keep things simple while using these cookers. They're not interested in trendy kitchen gadgets, just practical solutions that get the job done. Think of it like a food time capsule, a sealed jar of goodness you can open months later and enjoy like no time has passed. And let's be honest, there's something oddly satisfying about knowing a meal you made today could still be waiting for you 10 years from now. If this all sounds a bit futuristic, it really isn't. Pressure-cooked food has been a go-to method for doomsday preppers and astronauts for ages. With proper storage, pressure-cooked meals can last a decade without breaking a sweat. The Amish probably aren't preparing for the apocalypse, but they are preparing for life's little hiccups, like winter storms or long days in the fields when cooking feels like a chore. In the end, that jar of chicken isn't just food, it's peace of mind in edible form. Ever wonder what would happen if jerky and trail teamed up? You get something like pin, an ancient food that's as practical as it is peculiar. For the Amish, pin isn't just a quirky experiment, it's a survival tool made by blending dried meat, rendered fat, and occasionally a few dried berries. It's not a fancy dish, but it's enough to get you through a long, cold winter. It's dense, fuel-packed, and works like a charm. When you're trying to store chicken for months without a fridge, that's all that really matters. While modern folks might think of pin as a relic from survivalists or history buffs, it's still a solid choice for anyone looking to keep food simple, nutritious, and shelf-stable. The Amish have mastered the art of making things last, and they've embraced pin's no-nonsense philosophy. High in calories, built to endure, it's the food equivalent of an old pickup truck, reliable, tough, and always there when you need it. Fur traders and explorers used it for a reason. They couldn't afford spoiled food while trekking through unforgiving landscapes. And much like the Amish, they couldn't afford waste when harsh winters rolled in. Sure, offering someone a bite of chicken pin might raise an eyebrow or two, but the genius lies in its simplicity. A handful of it could fuel you through a morning of chopping firewood, milking cows, or just surviving another icy February. With every bite, you're tasting history because this method isn't just Amish ingenuity. It's a tradition passed down from generations who knew that sometimes the best way to prepare for tomorrow is by preserving today. Now, you wouldn't think soaking chicken in vinegar would be the first idea that comes to mind when trying to keep it from spoiling. But for the Amish, vinegar pickling isn't just about adding a punch of tangy flavor. It's a clever, low-maintenance preservation technique. The acidic environment vinegar creates Sen's bacteria packing, leaving the chicken safe to eat for months. It's a bit like giving your chicken a hostile marinade that says, "Bacteria? Not today." At first glance, it might seem strange, but this trick has stood the test of time. During World War I, soldiers relied on pickled meat to survive the trenches, and the Amish have kept that same practicality alive. Sure, the idea of vinegary chicken might raise a few eyebrows at the dinner table, but once you try it, it's hard not to appreciate how both clever and tasty this method is. And let's be real, if you've ever found yourself fishing moldy leftovers from the back of the fridge, you'll definitely appreciate the brilliance of having chicken you can pull straight from the brine and eat without fear. Not everyone needs to be a fan of pickling, but when you're living off the land and convenience stores are hours away, you learn to see the genius in a jar of vinegar-soaked meat. Plus, if soldiers could survive war zones with it, surely you can survive a curious glance or two when you share your secret weapon against spoilage. When it comes to dehydration, the Amish aren't just making snacks, they're creating food that can stand the test of time. Drying chicken to the point where it becomes jerky isn't just about flavor, although it does taste great. It's about stripping away every last drop of moisture, so bacteria don't have a chance. Without water, those tiny spoilage-causing microbes wave the white flag and move on a mess with someone else's food. The beauty of dehydration is in its simplicity. You hang the chicken to dry, sometimes in the sun or near a warm stove, and nature takes care of the rest. It's like playing the slowest waiting game ever, but with delicious rewards at the end. No gas station jerky could ever compete with this old-school method. Properly dehydrated chicken isn't just a snack, it's a survival tool. In fact, travelers and soldiers for centuries carried dried meat, knowing it would stay good no matter where their journeys took them. For the Amish, every method of food preservation is a nod to tradition and an embrace of nature's simplicity. From pickling and dehydrating to brining, each technique is a testament to their ingenuity and respect for resources. Whether it's the tangy punch of pickled chicken, the moisture-locking magic of brine, or the use of ice and fat to keep food safe and delicious, these methods prove that in a world obsessed with modern conveniences, sometimes the old ways are still the best. So, next time you think about food storage, think about the Amish and how they've perfected these timeless techniques. Whether you're preserving food for the future or just looking for a flavor-packed way to elevate your meals, the Amish have some ingenious solutions that can stand the test of time. By adopting their methods, you're not just preserving chicken or food. You're preserving a piece of history one bite at a time. And who knows? You might just find yourself ditching the fridge and embracing these old-school preservation techniques in your own kitchen. After all, in a world of fast food and throwaway culture, isn't it nice to know there's still a little room for something more enduring?